Every conversation you've ever had was happening on two levels simultaneously. On the surface, there were words, polite exchanges, stated intentions, carefully constructed sentences designed to convey specific meanings. But underneath, running parallel to every syllable spoken, was another conversation entirely. A hidden dialogue expressed through the tilt of a head, the flash of an emotion across someone's face lasting less than a fifth of a second, the subtle shift in vocal tone that betrayed what the words were trying to conceal, the unconscious repositioning of the body that revealed comfort or threat, attraction or repulsion, truth or carefully crafted fiction. You missed almost all of it. Not because you weren't paying attention, not because you're socially incompetent or emotionally unintelligent. You missed it because you were never taught to see it. No one showed you that while someone's mouth was saying they were happy for your success. Their jaw was clenching and their smile never reached their eyes. No one pointed out that while your romantic partner was reassuring you about their commitment, their body language had become distant and their eyes were scanning for exits. No one taught you to notice that while the person across the negotiating table was claiming this was their final offer, their voice pitch had risen and their breathing had quickened, revealing that they were actually desperate to close the deal. You've been walking through life half blind, making critical decisions about who to trust, who to love, who to hire, who to partner with, based almost entirely on what people choose to tell you. And people lie. Not always maliciously, not always consciously. But they lie through omission, through performance, through telling you what they think you want to hear or what serves their interests in the moment. They lie because they're lying to themselves. They lie because the truth is complicated and the fiction is convenient. And you believed them. Because you had no other choice. Because the only information you were gathering came through the channel that's easiest to manipulate and control. Words. Think about the last time you were blindsided by someone's behavior. The friend who suddenly turned cold and you had no idea why. The colleague who seemed supportive until the moment they weren't. The relationship that felt solid until it shattered without warning. In each case, if you look back now with complete honesty, there were signs. Small inconsistencies. Subtle shifts in how they acted around you. Moments where what they said didn't quite match how they said it, or what their body was doing while they said it. But you didn't see those signs, or you saw them and dismissed them because you didn't know how to interpret them, or you felt something was off but couldn't articulate what. So you ignored your instincts and trusted their words instead. This blindness has cost you, in ways large and small. In relationships that never should have started, and relationships that ended before you saw it coming. In business deals that went wrong. In opportunities you gave to the wrong people, and opportunities you missed with the right ones. In the constant, exhausting anxiety of never quite knowing where you stand with others. In the vulnerability to manipulation by anyone skilled enough to tell you what you want to hear while pursuing their own agenda. You've spent your entire life trying to figure people out through the least reliable channel of communication they possess, and wondering why you keep getting it wrong. But here's what changes everything. Here's the truth that will transform how you move through the world from this moment forward. Human beings cannot help but reveal themselves. It's neurologically impossible to maintain complete control over every channel of communication simultaneously. The conscious mind can script words and practice facial expressions, but it cannot override the autonomic, nervous system responses that occur under stress. It cannot perfectly coordinate micro-expressions that flash across the face before conscious suppression kicks in. It cannot eliminate the baseline deviations that occur when cognitive load increases or emotional significance rises. People are constantly telling you the truth about what they think, feel, want, and intend. They're just not telling you with words. They're telling you with their bodies, their faces, their voices, their behaviors, their patterns over time. They're broadcasting signals every single moment, signals that are more honest than anything that comes out of their mouths because these signals bypass conscious control. You just haven't learned to read those signals yet. Until now. By the time you complete this journey, you will possess a form of vision that most people will never develop. You will walk into a room and within minutes understand dynamics that others miss entirely. You will have conversations where you're hearing not just what's being said, but what's being carefully avoided. You will watch someone's face and see the emotions they're trying to hide flickering across it before they can suppress them. You will listen to someone's voice and hear the stress, the deception, the genuine enthusiasm, or the performed interest in the subtle variations of pitch, pace, and tone. You will know when someone is lying, not because you've become psychic, but because lying creates cognitive load that manifests in detectable behavioral changes. You will know when someone is genuinely interested in you versus when they're being polite. You will know when trust is deserved and when it's being manipulated. You will know when to move forward with confidence and when to protect yourself from threats you would have previously missed. This isn't mind reading. This is pattern recognition. This is understanding the science of nonverbal communication and the psychology of human behavior. This is training your brain to perceive what's already there, but has been invisible to you because no one taught you where to look or how to interpret what you're seeing. This is developing the perceptual accuracy that transforms everything. Your relationships become more authentic because you can distinguish between genuine connection and skilled performance. Your professional life becomes more successful because you can read the room, understand unstated concerns, and navigate social dynamics with precision. Your personal safety increases because you can spot manipulation, recognize predatory behavior, and identify red flags before they become catastrophes. Most importantly, this is about ending the isolation of never truly knowing what others think and feel, about replacing the constant anxiety of social uncertainty with the quiet confidence that comes from understanding human nature at a level most people never reach, about trusting yourself again because your perceptions have become accurate enough to rely on. Some people fear that learning to read others will make them cynical, that seeing through social performances will destroy their ability to connect authentically, that understanding how easily people deceive themselves and others will turn them into paranoid skeptics who trust no one. This fear is backwards. The opposite is true. Right now, you're vulnerable to everyone because you can't tell the difference between honesty and deception, between genuine interest and manipulation, between people who mean what they say and people who are performing. This inability to discriminate forces you to either trust indiscriminately, which gets you hurt, or trust no one, which keeps you isolated. Neither approach works. When you develop the ability to read people accurately, you can finally trust appropriately. You can identify the people who deserve your trust and invest deeply in those relationships without reservation. You can recognize the people who don't deserve your trust and protect yourself without becoming bitter. You can navigate the vast middle ground of normal human interaction with calibrated engagement, giving what's appropriate to each relationship based on what's actually there, rather than what you hope might be there. This creates deeper connection, not less, because you're no longer connecting with your fantasy of who someone is. You're connecting with who they actually are, and they can feel the difference. When you truly see someone, beneath their performance and their pretense, and you accept what you see without judgment, that creates intimacy that surface-level interaction can never achieve. The skills you're about to develop are not magic. They're not even particularly difficult once you understand the underlying principles and practice the observation techniques. Humans are remarkably predictable once you know what to look for. We all operate according to similar psychological patterns. We all broadcast our internal states through the same biological channels. We all reveal our true priorities through our behavior over time, regardless of what we claim those priorities to be. You're about to learn the language that everyone speaks, but almost no one consciously understands. The language of the body, the face, the voice. The language of behavioral patterns and baseline deviations. The language of congruence and incongruence between what someone says and what every other channel of communication is broadcasting. And once you speak this language fluently, you will never see human interaction the same way again. You will watch people lying to themselves and each other, and you will see it clearly. You will watch manipulation attempts and recognize them for what they are before they can take hold. You will watch authentic emotion and genuine connection and know the difference between that and skilled imitation. This mastery will change how you choose relationships, how you navigate your career, how you protect yourself and the people you care about, how you invest your time, energy, and trust, how you move through the world with the confidence that comes from truly understanding what's happening beneath the surface of every human interaction. The invisible language you've been missing your entire life is about to become visible. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you develop this perceptual capability, it becomes part of how you naturally process the world. You don't have to try to read people. You simply do. The way you currently breathe without thinking about it. The way you recognize faces automatically without conscious effort. This is the promise. By the end of this journey, you will possess skills that most people will live their entire lives without developing. You will understand human nature at a level that transforms every relationship you have and every interaction you navigate. You will never again be blindsided by behavior you should have seen coming. You will never again invest in people who are showing you through their actions that they're not who they claim to be with their words. You will finally be able to see what's actually happening. And that changes everything. The cost of this blindness reveals itself slowly, then all at once. You don't notice the accumulation of small misreadings and minor miscalculations until suddenly you're standing in the wreckage of something that mattered, trying to understand how you missed every warning sign that now seems so obvious in retrospect. Let me show you what this actually looks like in real life. You had a colleague who always seemed genuinely supportive. They asked about your projects with what appeared to be authentic interest. They offered encouragement during difficult periods. They smiled when you shared your wins. Every conversation left you feeling like you had an ally in the office, someone who had your back in a competitive environment. So you shared your ideas with them. You told them about the proposal you were developing, the strategy you'd been refining, the approach you thought might solve the problem everyone else had given up on. They listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, told you it sounded brilliant. 3 weeks later, they presented your idea to leadership as their own. By the time you realized what had happened, they'd already gotten the credit, the promotion, the opportunity that should have been yours. And when you finally confronted them, they looked you straight in the eye and denied everything. Said the ideas were completely different. Said you must be misremembering. Said you were being paranoid and competitive. But here's what you didn't see while it was happening. You didn't notice that their smiles never reached their eyes. You didn't catch the micro-expressions of contempt that flashed across their face when you shared your successes. You didn't register that their body language was closed and guarded, despite their encouraging words. You didn't hear the subtle edge in their voice when they asked those thoughtful questions, the tone that suggested they were gathering intelligence rather than offering support. You didn't notice that they only showed interest in your work, never shared anything meaningful about their own. You didn't track the pattern of how they positioned themselves physically in meetings, always slightly between you and the decision-makers, subtly blocking your visibility. All the signs were there. You just didn't know how to read them. And that blindness cost you months of work, a major career opportunity, and your trust in your own judgment. Or think about the romantic relationship that consumed 2 years of your life. Your partner said all the right things, talked about the future you'd build together, made plans that stretched months and years ahead, used the language of commitment and forever. And you believed every word because you wanted to believe. Because the words were exactly what you needed to hear. But their behavior told a completely different story, a story you couldn't read because you were listening only to their words and ignoring everything else they were communicating. They were consistently unavailable during important moments. Their physical affection had been decreasing steadily over months, a pattern so gradual you didn't notice the baseline shift. They became defensive and aggressive when you tried to discuss relationship concerns, turning every attempt at honest conversation into a conflict where you ended up apologizing. They kept their phone face down and took calls in private. They created distance with friends and family who might have noticed what you couldn't see. They talked about the future in vague, non-committal terms despite the specific language they used. When you finally discovered they'd been seeing someone else for the last 8 months, you were devastated. Not just by the betrayal, but by your own inability to see what was right in front of you. Because now, looking back with eyes that could finally see, every sign was obvious. The way they turned their body away from you during conversations, the decrease in eye contact, the shift in vocal tone from warm to neutral to cold over the months, the incongruence between their words about commitment and their behavior of withdrawal, the stress in their voice when you talked about future plans, the relief you can now recognize when you had to cancel plans together. You gave 2 years to someone who was showing you the truth every single day. You just couldn't read it, or the business opportunity that felt off from the first meeting. You sat across the table from someone, making promises that sounded too good to be true, offering terms that seemed incredibly favorable, presenting an opportunity that could transform your financial situation. And some part of you knew something wasn't right. Your gut was screaming at you that this didn't make sense, that people don't offer these kinds of deals without hidden motives, that something about this person didn't align. But you couldn't articulate what was wrong. You couldn't point to specific evidence. You couldn't explain to your spouse or your business partner why you had reservations about an opportunity that looked this good on paper. So you dismissed your instincts. You told yourself you were being paranoid, overly cautious, self-sabotaging. You signed the contract. 6 months later, you realized you'd been systematically deceived. The terms that seemed favorable were full of clauses you didn't understand that gave them complete control. The promises were never enforceable. The opportunity was designed from the beginning to extract everything you had to offer while providing nothing of real value in return. You lost money, time, reputation, and the business relationships that trusted your judgment. And now you can see what you missed. The way they maintained too much eye contact, a performance of trustworthiness that genuine people don't need to perform. The way their explanations became more elaborate when you asked simple questions, the cognitive load of maintaining deception requiring more words than truth would need. The way they rushed you toward decisions, creating artificial urgency to prevent you from thinking carefully. The way they mirrored your body language too perfectly, a manipulation tactic that genuine rapport doesn't require. The way their vocal tone became soothing and hypnotic when you expressed concerns, designed to calm your defenses rather than address your questions. You had instincts trying to protect you. Your unconscious mind was processing thousands of subtle signals and generating warning feelings. But you didn't trust those feelings because you couldn't consciously identify what was triggering them. So you overrode your own protective instincts and walked directly into a trap. Or think about the friend who needed you desperately, but you didn't see it until it was too late. They seemed fine, a little quieter than usual maybe, perhaps a bit more withdrawn, but they said they were okay when you asked. They smiled and changed the subject. They assured you everything was fine, just busy, just tired, just stressed about work, normal things, believable things. So you accepted those explanations and went on with your life, until the day you got the call that they had attempted suicide, and suddenly you were replaying every conversation from the past 6 months, seeing for the first time all the signs you'd completely missed, the way their smiles had become performative rather than genuine, the way they'd started cancelling plans more frequently, the way their energy had shifted from animated to flat, the way they'd stopped talking about future events, the way they'd given away possessions that mattered to them, the way their responses to your questions had become shorter, more distant, more disconnected. They were showing you their pain in every interaction. Their body language was screaming distress. Their facial expressions were displaying depression. Their behavioral patterns were shifting in textbook ways. But you couldn't read the language they were speaking, so you missed your chance to help when help might have made the difference. This is the cost of being blind to human nature. It's not abstract. It's not theoretical. It's the accumulation of misplaced trust in people who showed you they were untrustworthy if only you could see it. It's the wasted years invested in relationships that were revealing their true nature from the beginning. It's the missed opportunities with genuine people because you couldn't distinguish them from the performers and manipulators. It's the vulnerability to anyone skilled enough in deception to tell you what you want to hear. But the cost goes deeper than individual incidents. The real price you pay is the constant state of uncertainty you live in when you can't read people accurately. You never quite know where you stand with others. You're always guessing at their true feelings, their real intentions, their actual level of commitment or interest. You're always one step behind the social dynamics happening around you, reacting to situations after they've already developed, rather than seeing them forming and positioning yourself advantageously. You second-guess your instincts constantly because you can't trust your perceptions. When you feel like something is off, you don't know if that feeling is accurate intuition or paranoid projection. When you feel like someone is trustworthy, you don't know if you're reading them correctly or just seeing what you want to see. This creates exhausting anxiety, where every relationship and interaction carries the weight of possible misinterpretation. You watch other people navigate social situations with apparent ease and wonder what they're seeing that you're missing. They seem to know who to trust and who to avoid. They seem to understand group dynamics and position themselves effectively. They seem to recognize opportunities and threats before those things become obvious. And you're stuck trying to figure out what's happening while everyone else has already moved on to the next phase. You feel socially incompetent even though you're intelligent and capable in other areas of your life. You can solve complex problems, master difficult skills, achieve impressive goals. But you can't consistently read whether someone likes you or is just being polite. You can't tell if someone is being honest or feeding you carefully constructed lies. You can't distinguish between genuine enthusiasm and professional courtesy. You can't recognize manipulation until you're already caught in it. This creates a profound isolation. Because you can never be certain of what others truly think or feel about you. You're always operating with incomplete information, making your best guesses, hoping you're reading situations correctly, but never quite sure. It's like trying to play a game where everyone else can see the board clearly, but you're only seeing shadows and outlines, forced to make critical decisions based on partial information while watching everyone else move with confidence. The people around you are constantly communicating their true thoughts, feelings, and intentions. They're telling you whether they're trustworthy or deceptive, whether they're genuinely interested or performing politeness, whether they're emotionally stable or volatile, whether they're competent or incompetent, whether they mean what they say or say what's convenient. They're broadcasting all of this information continuously through channels you haven't learned to read, so you stumble through relationships and interactions, getting blindsided by betrayals you should have seen coming, investing in people who are showing you they're not worth the investment, missing connections with people who are genuinely aligned with you, and constantly discovering important truths too late for that knowledge to matter. This is what it costs to be blind, and you've been paying this price your entire life without realizing there was another way to see. But here's what you need to understand before we go any further. This blindness isn't your fault. It's not a character flaw or a lack of intelligence or some fundamental deficiency in your social capabilities. Your inability to read people accurately is the predictable result of how your brain evolved, how society conditioned you to interact, and how the modern world has systematically degraded the very skills you need most. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. It has to be. Your brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy, despite being only 2% of your body weight. Running this expensive biological computer requires your brain to develop shortcuts, automatic processes, and default assumptions that allow it to function without burning through resources, constantly analyzing every piece of information it encounters. One of the most fundamental shortcuts your brain uses is taking people at face value. When someone tells you something, your brain's default response is to believe it. Not because you're gullible or naive, but because questioning everything anyone says would be cognitively exhausting. You'd have to analyze every statement for truthfulness, evaluate every claim against evidence, cross-reference every assertion with what you know about reality. You'd spend all day, every day, doing nothing but verifying basic communication. So your brain evolved a much more efficient approach. Assume people are telling the truth unless you have strong reasons to believe otherwise. This works reasonably well in small, stable communities where everyone knows everyone else and reputation matters deeply. If someone lies or deceives, everyone finds out, and they face social consequences that make deception costly. In those environments, most people tell the truth most of the time because the cost of lying exceeds the benefit. Your brain's default assumption of truthfulness is calibrated for that world. But you don't live in that world anymore. You live in a world of brief encounters with strangers, online interactions with people you'll never meet, professional relationships built on strategic self-presentation, and social media environments where everyone is performing a curated version of themselves. In this world, the cost of deception is minimal, and the benefits are often substantial. But your brain is still using the same default assumption it evolved to use in small tribes. Believe what people say, unless you have overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This is the first reason you miss what's right in front of you. Your brain is designed to trust by default in a world where trust should be earned. The second reason is confirmation bias. Once you form an initial impression of someone, your brain automatically filters all subsequent information to support that impression. If you initially decide someone is trustworthy, you'll notice and remember all the behaviors that confirm their trustworthiness, while filtering out or explaining away behaviors that contradict it. If you initially decide someone is threatening, you'll do the opposite. You'll see threat in neutral behaviors and miss positive signals entirely. This happens unconsciously. You're not deliberately choosing to ignore contradictory information. Your brain is doing it for you, below the level of conscious awareness, because changing your mind about someone requires cognitive effort. It's much more efficient to maintain existing beliefs and fit new information into those beliefs than to constantly update your understanding based on conflicting evidence. So when your supportive colleague shows micro-expressions of contempt, your brain doesn't flag that as important information because it contradicts your existing belief that they're supportive. When your committed partner starts creating distance, your brain explains it away as stress or temporary distraction because the alternative requires you to question the entire foundation of your relationship. When the business opportunity shows signs of deception, your brain focuses on the promising elements, because you've already decided this could be the break you've been waiting for. Confirmation bias keeps you locked into your initial impressions, even when the evidence is mounting that those impressions were wrong. You see what you expect to see. Everything else gets filtered out before it reaches conscious awareness. The third reason is projection. You assume other people think and feel the way you do. If you're honest, you assume others are honest. If you value loyalty, you assume others value loyalty. If you communicate directly, you assume others communicate directly. This assumption makes sense on the surface. You only have access to one human mind, your own, so you use your mind as the template for understanding other minds. But people are vastly different in how they process information, make decisions, experience emotions, and navigate relationships. Some people are highly conscientious and feel genuine guilt when they violate their own standards. Others have almost no conscience and feel no remorse for harming others. Some people form deep emotional attachments and experience profound loyalty. Others form shallow attachments and switch allegiances based on convenience. Some people are constitutionally incapable of deception and experience intense discomfort when lying. Others lie reflexively and feel nothing. When you project your own psychological makeup onto others, you miss these fundamental differences. You can't imagine someone could smile at you while planning to betray you because you couldn't do that. You can't conceive that someone could fake an entire relationship for personal gain because that's incomprehensible to you. You can't believe someone could look you in the eye and lie without any physiological stress response, because lying creates stress for you. Your projection blinds you to the reality that not everyone operates like you do, and some people operate in ways that are completely foreign to your own psychology. The fourth reason is childhood conditioning. From your earliest years, you were taught to be polite, to accept what adults told you, to not question authority, to trust teachers, parents, and other authority figures, even when your instinct said something was wrong. You were taught that your gut feelings were less reliable than what grown-ups told you explicitly. You were socialized to override your own perceptions in favor of social compliance. You were taught that it's rude to call out inconsistencies in what people say, that it's inappropriate to mention when someone's body language contradicts their words, that it's offensive to question someone's stated motivations, that it's paranoid to doubt people's explanations even when those explanations don't make logical sense. You learned that maintaining social harmony is more important than pursuing truth. This created what we might call the politeness barrier, a learned reluctance to trust your own perceptions when they conflict with what someone is explicitly telling you, an automatic suppression of your instincts in favor of taking people at their word, a deep discomfort with acknowledging that someone might be deceiving you even when the evidence is obvious. So when you notice that someone's facial expression doesn't match their stated emotion, you don't mention it because that would be awkward. When you sense that someone's explanation for their behavior doesn't add up, you don't push because that would be confrontational. When you feel that something is off about a situation, you dismiss your own feeling because questioning it would violate social norms. The politeness barrier keeps you silent when you should be asking questions, passive when you should be investigating, accepting when you should be skeptical. It makes you complicit in your own deception by training you to value social smoothness over perceptual accuracy. The fifth reason is technology. The more your communication shifts to text-based, digital channels, the more your ability to read people in face-to-face interaction atrophies. Reading people is a skill that requires practice. You get better at it by observing thousands of faces, voices, and bodies in thousands of situations, by seeing how different people express different emotions, by noticing how context changes meaning, by building a vast internal database of patterns that your unconscious mind can reference when evaluating new interactions. But when most of your communication happens through text messages, emails, and social media posts, you lose access to all the channels that carry the most honest information. You can't see facial expressions in a text message. You can't hear vocal tone in an email. You can't observe body language on social media. You're getting only the most controllable, most manipulable channel of communication. The words people consciously choose to send you. This doesn't just mean you miss information during digital communication. It means you never develop the perceptual skills you need for in-person interaction. Your pattern recognition database stays small. Your unconscious processing abilities remain underdeveloped. Your calibration stays uncalibrated. And when you do have face-to-face interactions, you're relying on skills you've never properly trained. An entire generation is growing up with dramatically reduced face-to-face interaction during the critical developmental years when these perceptual abilities are supposed to be forming. They're losing the ability to read micro-expressions, vocal nuance, and body language because they're spending thousands of hours staring at screens instead of faces. The sixth reason is emotional reactivity. Your own emotions cloud your perception of others. When you're attracted to someone, you miss red flags because you want them to be who you hope they are, rather than who they're showing themselves to be. When you need someone to be trustworthy, you don't see the signs of untrustworthiness, because acknowledging them would force you to confront an uncomfortable reality. When you're invested in a particular outcome, you filter information to support that outcome rather than seeing what's actually there. This emotional distortion of perception isn't conscious. You're not deliberately ignoring warning signs. Your brain is automatically adjusting what reaches conscious awareness based on what you emotionally need to believe. The romantic partner who is withdrawing doesn't seem to be withdrawing because you need them to be committed. The business opportunity that's too good to be true doesn't seem suspicious because you desperately want it to be legitimate. The friend who is manipulating you doesn't seem manipulative because you need to believe you have genuine friendships. Your emotional investment in particular beliefs about people makes you blind to evidence that contradicts those beliefs. The stronger your emotional need for someone to be a certain way, the less able you are to see when they're actually the opposite. All of these factors combine to create systematic blindness to what's right in front of you. Your brain's default trust assumption, your confirmation bias that locks you into initial impressions, your projection of your own psychology onto people who operate completely differently, your childhood conditioning to be polite and compliant, the politeness barrier that stops you from acknowledging what you're perceiving, the degradation of perceptual skills through technology, and your own emotional reactivity distorting what you allow yourself to see. None of this is your fault. You didn't choose how your brain evolved. You didn't choose how society conditioned you. You didn't choose to grow up in a world where digital communication replaced face-to-face interaction. You didn't choose to have emotions that influence your perceptions. But you can choose what happens next. You can choose to understand these mechanisms so they no longer control you unconsciously. You can choose to develop the skills that overcome these built-in limitations. You can choose to see what you've been missing. Understanding where you are right now requires a map, not just of where you're going, but of the entire landscape of perceptual development from complete blindness to effortless mastery. This journey has 4 distinct stages, and knowing which stage you're in determines what you need to focus on next. Most people spend their entire lives in stage 1 without ever realizing there are other stages that exist. This is unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. You're completely unaware that every interaction contains multiple layers of communication happening simultaneously. You take people's words at face value and assume that's the whole conversation. When you get blindsided by someone's behavior, you genuinely didn't see it coming. When relationships shift suddenly, you experience those shifts as random and unpredictable rather than as the culmination of signals you were missing all along. In stage 1, you believe you're reasonably good at reading people. You think you can tell when someone is lying, or when someone likes you, or when someone is trustworthy. This false confidence exists because you don't have the perceptual framework to recognize all the times you're getting it wrong. The colleague who is undermining you seems supportive because you're only processing their words. The romantic partner who is emotionally checked out seems committed because you're believing their statements rather than reading their behaviors. The manipulator seems genuine because you can't perceive the incongruence between what they're saying and what every other channel of communication is broadcasting. Stage 1 feels normal. It feels like how everyone experiences the world. You attribute your social struggles to bad luck, to choosing the wrong people, to circumstances beyond your control. You don't realize you're operating with a fundamental perceptual limitation that makes accurate assessment nearly impossible. You're like someone trying to navigate with a map that's missing most of the terrain. You can see some features, but you're missing the mountains, the rivers, the cliffs that determine whether your path is safe or catastrophic. When you look back at relationships that failed or situations that went wrong, you can't identify clear warning signs because you weren't seeing those signs when they were happening. Everything seems fine until suddenly it isn't. People seem trustworthy until suddenly they betray you. Situations seem safe until suddenly they're dangerous, and you're left confused, hurt, and unable to explain how you missed what now seems obvious to others who were observing from the outside. This is where most people stay. They live their entire lives in unconscious incompetence, never developing the perceptual skills that would allow them to read the hidden dynamics in every interaction. They trust the wrong people, miss opportunities with the right people, and wonder why relationships and social situations feel so unpredictable and difficult to navigate. But then something happens that shifts you into stage 2, conscious incompetence. Maybe you read something that opens your eyes to how much communication happens non-verbally. Maybe you get burned badly enough by someone that you start researching deception and manipulation. Maybe you watch someone who is skilled at reading people and realize they're seeing things you can't see. Something creates awareness that there are multiple levels of communication you've been completely missing. Stage 2 is uncomfortable. Now you know that you don't know. You're aware that people are broadcasting information through facial expressions, body language, vocal tone, and behavioral patterns. You start trying to read these signals, but you don't know how to interpret what you're seeing. You notice someone's micro-expression, but you're not sure if that flash across their face was anger, disgust, or contempt. You sense that something feels off about an interaction, but you can't articulate what's triggering that feeling. You observe someone's body language shift, but you don't know if it means they're uncomfortable, deceptive, or just adjusting their position. This stage can feel frustrating and destabilizing. You're paying attention to channels of communication you previously ignored, but you're misinterpreting them more often than you're reading them accurately. You might become paranoid, seeing threats and deception where none exists. You might lose trust in your judgment entirely because you're noticing contradictions, but don't yet have the framework to understand what they mean. You might feel socially incompetent in new ways because you're consciously attending to aspects of interaction that used to happen automatically below your awareness. Stage 2 is where you start questioning everything. Is that person actually interested in what I'm saying, or are they just being polite? Is this person trustworthy, or are they performing trustworthiness? Is this opportunity legitimate, or am I being manipulated? You're asking the right questions, but you don't yet have the skills to answer them reliably. You know the information is there in front of you, embedded in how people move, speak, and express themselves. But you're like someone who knows a language exists, but can't yet speak it fluently. The danger of stage 2 is giving up. It's tempting to decide that reading people is too complicated, too subjective, too uncertain. It's tempting to retreat back to stage 1, where at least you weren't consciously aware of how much you were missing. Some people stay in stage 2 for years, aware that they're not reading people accurately, but never developing the systematic skills that would move them to the next level. But if you persist, if you study the principles and practice the techniques, you move into stage 3, conscious competence. This is where reading people becomes reliable, but requires deliberate effort. You've learned the frameworks. You understand baselines and deviations. You know how to look for clusters of signals across multiple channels. You can recognize incongruence between what someone is saying and what their body is doing. You can decode emotional states from facial expressions. You can hear deception in vocal patterns. In stage 3, you can walk into a room and accurately assess the social dynamics. You can have a conversation and notice when someone becomes uncomfortable with specific topics. You can observe someone over time and identify their patterns, their triggers, their authentic self versus their performed self. You can spot manipulation attempts and recognize when someone is trying to influence you through psychological tactics rather than honest communication. But all of this requires conscious attention and mental energy. You have to deliberately watch for these signals. You have to consciously compare current behavior to baseline. You have to actively integrate information from multiple channels. It's not yet automatic. You can do it when you're focused and intentional, but it's exhausting to maintain that level of observation constantly. When you're tired, distracted, or emotionally activated, your perceptual accuracy drops significantly. Stage 3 is where reading people becomes a practical skill rather than just theoretical knowledge. You start making better decisions about who to trust. You catch deception before it causes serious damage. You recognize when relationships are shifting before those shifts become crises. You protect yourself from manipulation because you can see it forming. You identify genuine opportunities and genuine people because you can distinguish authentic signals from performed ones. This stage feels powerful, but also demanding. You're gathering accurate information, but it requires concentration. You're navigating social situations more successfully, but you can't relax entirely because reading people is still taking conscious mental resources. You're better than most people at perceiving hidden dynamics, but you're not yet at the level where it happens effortlessly. Stage 3 is where dedicated practice lives. The more you consciously apply these skills, the more they begin to integrate into your automatic processing. Neural pathways strengthen. Pattern recognition becomes faster. What used to require deliberate analysis starts happening with less effort. You're building toward the final stage. Stage 4 is unconscious competence. This is mastery. Reading people becomes as automatic as breathing. You walk into a room and instantly perceive the authentic dynamics without having to think about it. You have a conversation and know within minutes whether someone is being genuine or performing. You hear someone speak and immediately recognize truth versus deception, interest versus politeness, confidence versus bluffing. You watch someone's face and see the emotions they're trying to hide flickering across it before conscious suppression kicks in. In stage 4, you don't have to try to read people. You simply do. Your brain has internalized the frameworks and automated the process. You're processing micro-expressions, vocal patterns, body language clusters, baseline deviations, and behavioral incongruence, all simultaneously without conscious effort. The information integrates into immediate perceptual awareness the same way you currently see colors or hear sounds. It's just there, available, obvious. This is where social navigation becomes effortless. You know who to trust and who to keep at distance. You recognize manipulation the moment someone attempts it, and it doesn't land because you see it for what it is. You understand group dynamics instantly and position yourself effectively. You build deep connections with people who are genuinely aligned with you because you can perceive authenticity. You protect yourself and the people you care about from threats that others don't even recognize as threats. Stage 4 feels like having a superpower that nobody else possesses. You're operating with information that's invisible to most people. You see through performances that fool everyone around you. You understand motivations that people are hiding, even from themselves. You predict behavior accurately because you're reading the underlying patterns rather than just listening to stated intentions. But here's what's important to understand. Stage 4 doesn't happen by accident. It's not a talent you're born with. It's not a gift that some people have and others don't. It's the result of systematic development through the earlier stages. You move from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence by becoming aware that multiple levels of communication exist. You move from conscious incompetence to conscious competence by learning the frameworks and practicing the skills. You move from conscious competence to unconscious competence through repetition and integration until the skills become automatic. Most people never progress beyond stage 1. They live their entire lives unaware of the hidden dynamics in every interaction, making decisions based on incomplete information, getting blindsided by behaviors they should have seen coming. Some people reach stage 2 and stay there, aware they're missing information, but never developing the skills to interpret it accurately. A smaller number reach stage 3 and can read people when they consciously focus on it. Very few reach stage 4, where it becomes effortless and automatic. But stage 4 is accessible to anyone willing to do the work. Your starting point doesn't matter. Whether you're currently in stage 1 or stage 3, the path forward is the same. Learn the frameworks, practice the techniques, build the perceptual database through observation and feedback. Integrate the skills through repetition until they become automatic. The journey from social blindness to perceptual mastery is predictable. The stages are clear. The progression is systematic, and the destination is worth every bit of effort the journey requires. The foundation of reading people accurately rests on a single principle that changes everything once you understand it. You cannot know what someone's behavior means until you know what's normal for them. This is their baseline. And without establishing baseline first, every signal you try to read is just noise. Here's why this matters so profoundly. There are no universal tells. Crossing arms doesn't always mean defensiveness. Breaking eye contact doesn't always mean deception. Touching the face doesn't always signal nervousness. These behaviors mean different things for different people in different contexts. Some people cross their arms when they're cold. Some people break eye contact when they're thinking deeply. Some people touch their face out of habit that has nothing to do with their emotional state. If you try to read people by memorizing what specific gestures supposedly mean, you'll be wrong more often than you're right. You'll see deception where there's only concentration. You'll interpret defensiveness where there's only comfort. You'll miss actual signals because you're focused on behaviors that mean nothing for this particular person. But when you establish someone's baseline first, everything changes. Now you're not trying to interpret isolated behaviors. You're watching for changes, deviations, shifts from what's normal for this specific individual. And those deviations are what carry meaning, not the behaviors themselves, but the fact that they're different from baseline. Let me show you exactly how this works in practice. The first step is establishing baseline. This means observing someone during neutral, low-stress conversation about topics that don't carry emotional charge. You're watching how they naturally hold their body when they're relaxed and comfortable. Are they naturally animated with lots of hand gestures, or relatively still? Do they maintain steady eye contact, or do their eyes move around the room? Do they lean forward when engaged or sit back? What's their natural vocal tone? Fast-paced or slow? Loud or quiet? Do they speak in long, flowing sentences or short, choppy phrases? You're cataloguing their comfort indicators. What does this person do when they're genuinely relaxed and being authentic? Maybe they smile easily, and the smile reaches their eyes. Maybe they use open body language with arms uncrossed and palms occasionally visible. Maybe their voice has a warm, modulated quality. Maybe they maintain comfortable eye contact without staring. Maybe they mirror your energy naturally without it feeling forced or performative. Pay attention to their conversational style at baseline. Do they talk more or listen more? Do they ask questions or make statements? Do they share personal information readily or keep things surface level? Do they use humor frequently or stay serious? Do they interrupt or wait for natural pauses? How much detail do they provide in their answers? What's their natural energy level? High and enthusiastic, or calm and measured? This baseline establishment typically takes 10 to 20 minutes of neutral conversation. You're not interrogating them or putting them under pressure. You're just having a normal, low-stakes conversation about neutral topics while your unconscious mind is cataloging how they naturally communicate across all channels simultaneously. The second step is identifying their stress indicators. Now you introduce slightly more challenging topics or questions that require more thought. Nothing accusatory or confrontational yet, just questions that move beyond small talk. And you watch what changes. Does their body language shift? Does their eye contact pattern change? Does their vocal tone or pace adjust? Does their facial expression become more controlled or guarded? Some people become very still when stressed, minimizing movement and gesture. Others become more animated, filling space with nervous energy. Some people's voices rise in pitch under stress. Others become more monotone. Some people increase eye contact as if trying to convince you of their sincerity. Others break eye contact more frequently. The specific stress indicators don't matter. What matters is knowing what changes for this individual when they move from comfort to discomfort. Now you have the foundation. You know what normal looks like for this person. You know what comfort looks like. You know what stress looks like. And most importantly, you know what changes when they shift between states. The third step is watching for deviations from baseline when topics change or questions become more pointed. This is where you discover what matters to them, what they're hiding, what makes them uncomfortable, what they're invested in. Because humans cannot maintain perfect control over all channels of communication simultaneously when emotional significance rises or cognitive load increases. Something always deviates. Let me show you this in a job interview scenario. You're interviewing a candidate for a position. During the first 15 minutes of neutral conversation about their background and general career trajectory, you establish their baseline. They sit with open body language, arms resting comfortably on the chair. They maintain steady eye contact, looking at you about 70% of the time and occasionally glancing away when thinking. Their voice is warm and enthusiastic, pace is moderate, and they speak in complete sentences with good detail. They gesture naturally with their hands to emphasize points. Their facial expressions are animated, showing genuine emotion that matches what they're saying. This is baseline. This is normal for them when they're comfortable and telling you things that are true, and emotionally neutral. Now you ask them why they left their last position. Suddenly everything changes. Their arms cross over their chest. Their eye contact drops to maybe 20%, mostly looking down or to the side. Their voice loses the warmth and becomes flat, almost monotone. Their pace slows down. Their answers become shorter with less detail. Their gestures stop entirely. Their face becomes more controlled, less expressive. These deviations from baseline tell you something. Significant is happening with this topic. They're uncomfortable. They might be hiding something. They might be being deceptive about the circumstances of their departure. They might be embarrassed about what happened. The specific emotion doesn't matter yet. What matters is that this topic is emotionally charged for them in a way that other topics weren't. This is information you need. So you probe gently. You ask follow-up questions, and you watch whether they return to baseline or the deviations intensify. If they're being truthful, but the topic is just uncomfortable, they'll usually return toward baseline as they explain. If they're being deceptive, the deviations typically intensify because maintaining the deception increases cognitive load. Or consider a romantic relationship scenario. Over months or years, you've established your partner's baseline thoroughly. You know how they normally interact with you. Their baseline includes regular physical affection. They initiate touch. Frequently, they sit close to you. They make consistent eye contact during conversations. They talk enthusiastically about future plans, bringing up trips you're planning, goals you're working toward together, things they want to do next month or next year. They're present during conversations. Phone is usually face down and ignored. Their energy with you is warm and engaged. But recently, deviations have appeared. The physical affection has decreased noticeably. They used to initiate touch multiple times per hour when you were together. Now it's maybe a few times per day, and often only in response to your initiation. They sit further away from you than they used to. Eye contact has diminished. Conversations about the future have become vague and non-committal. When you bring up plans, they agree, but without the enthusiasm that used to be their baseline. Their phone has become a much more prominent presence. They check it frequently, take it with them to other rooms, respond to messages during conversations in ways they never used to. These are deviations from baseline. And deviations this consistent and this significant across multiple channels of communication indicate something has fundamentally shifted in their emotional investment. You don't need to catch them in a lie. You don't need to find evidence of wrongdoing. The baseline deviations are telling you that their internal state toward you and the relationship has changed. The warmth has decreased. The investment has decreased. The presence has decreased. This is the power of baseline and deviation. You're not guessing. You're not projecting. You're not relying on supposed universal tells. You're observing measurable changes in this specific person's patterns. And those changes reveal emotional reality more accurately than any words they might say. Here's another scenario. You're in a business negotiation. The person across from you establishes their baseline during preliminary discussion. They're confident, making strong eye contact, speaking in a clear voice, using expansive gestures, sitting forward in their chair, presenting their position with certainty. This is their baseline. This is how they communicate when they feel secure in their position. Then you make an offer, and suddenly their behavior shifts. They lean back slightly. Their gestures become smaller. Their voice rises slightly in pitch. They start speaking faster. Their eye contact becomes more intense, almost like they're trying harder to appear confident. They start providing more detailed justifications for their position than they were before. These deviations from baseline tell you that your offer hit close to their actual, acceptable range. They're not as secure in their negotiating position as they were appearing. The increased justification and the subtle stress indicators suggest they're closer to accepting than their words indicate. This information changes how you proceed with the negotiation. Or, imagine you're talking with a friend who seems fine on the surface. Their words say everything is okay, but you've known them for years. You know their baseline intimately, and you're noticing deviations. Their baseline energy is usually high and animated, but recently they've been more subdued, more flat in affect. Their baseline is lots of eye contact and engagement in conversation, but recently they've been more distant, less present, going through the motions of interaction without the authentic engagement that used to characterize your conversations. Their baseline includes sharing details about their life, asking about yours, making plans for things to do together. But recently they've become more withdrawn, less forthcoming, less interested in making future plans. These baseline deviations tell you something is wrong, even though their words say otherwise. They're struggling with something they're not verbalizing. And because you know their baseline, you can recognize this and offer support even when they're not directly asking for it. The baseline and deviation system works because it's completely personalized. You're not applying generic rules. You're learning this specific person's communication patterns and watching for changes. You're not memorizing what crossed arms supposedly mean. You're noticing that this person usually doesn't cross their arms, but suddenly did when you mentioned a specific topic. This is pattern recognition. This is change detection. This is how you read people accurately, regardless of whether they're naturally expressive or naturally reserved, whether they're extroverted or introverted, whether they come from a culture that encourages direct eye contact or one that considers it disrespectful. Their baseline is their baseline, and deviations from that baseline carry meaning that's specific to them. Start practicing this immediately with everyone you interact with. Establish baseline first, then watch for deviations. The deviations are where the truth lives. Once you understand baseline and deviation, you're ready for the sophisticated techniques that transform basic people reading into genuine mastery. These advanced tools work together as an integrated system, each one reinforcing and enhancing the others until you're processing information across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The first advanced principle is cluster reading. Never interpret a single signal in isolation. A single behavior means almost nothing. But 3 or 4 signals pointing in the same direction creates a readable pattern. This is how you eliminate false positives and dramatically increase accuracy. Human communication happens across 7 distinct channels simultaneously. Verbal content is what someone actually says, the literal meaning of their words. Vocal qualities are how they say it, the tone, pitch, pace, volume, and fluency of their speech. Facial expressions are the emotions displayed on their face, both the controlled expressions and the micro-expressions that flash too quickly for conscious suppression. Body positioning is how they orient themselves in space, whether they're leaning toward you or away, open or closed, relaxed or tense. Gestures are the movements of their hands and arms, the emphasis and illustration they add to communication. Proxemics is their use of space, how close they stand, whether they create barriers, how they position themselves relative to others. Autonomic responses are the physiological reactions they can't consciously control, like blushing, pupil dilation, breathing changes, and swallowing patterns. When someone is being authentic, all 7 channels align. Their words say they're interested. Their vocal tone is warm and engaged. Their face shows genuine positive emotion. Their body is oriented toward you. Their gestures are open and expressive. They move closer rather than creating distance, and their physiological responses show comfort rather than stress. This congruence across all channels is the signature of authenticity. But when someone is being deceptive, performing, or experiencing internal conflict, channels start contradicting each other. Their words say they're happy for you, but their vocal tone is flat. Their face shows a smile, but it doesn't reach their eyes and disappears too quickly. Their body turns slightly away, even as they're saying they want to stay and talk. Their gestures become more controlled and less natural. They maintain more distance than the conversation warrants. Their breathing becomes slightly faster and shallower. This incongruence is what you are looking for. Not a single contradictory signal, but a cluster of signals across multiple channels that don't align with the verbal content. When you see incongruence across 3 or more channels, you're looking at something that deserves closer attention. Let me show you what cluster reading looks like in practice. Someone tells you they're excited about a project you're proposing. Their words are enthusiastic, but watch the cluster. Their vocal tone lacks energy, coming out more monotone than excited. Their facial expression shows a smile that's controlled by the mouth muscles, but the eyes remain neutral, and the smile fades immediately when they stop speaking. Their body is angled slightly away from you rather than toward you. Their gestures are minimal and close to their body rather than expansive. They've stepped back half a step during the conversation. Their breathing is steady, but you notice them swallow hard before responding. Each individual signal could have an alternate explanation, but the cluster tells you the truth. They're not actually excited. They're being polite. They're telling you what they think you want to hear. And understanding this allows you to probe deeper, address their actual concerns, or simply recognize that you don't have their genuine buy-in regardless of what they're saying with their words. The second advanced principle is contextual analysis. The same behavior means completely different things in different contexts. You must always factor in the environment, the social situation, the physical conditions, and the cultural norms before interpreting any signal. Arms crossed in a cold room means someone is cold. Arms crossed during a tense conversation means they're creating a barrier. Arms suddenly crossed when you mention a specific topic means the topic triggered a defensive response. The behavior is identical. The meaning is entirely different based on context. Someone breaking eye contact while thinking through a complex problem is normal and means nothing. Someone breaking eye contact immediately after you ask them a pointed question suggests discomfort with that question. Someone maintaining too much eye contact, more than feels natural, often indicates they're performing trustworthiness rather than actually being trustworthy. Always ask yourself, what's the context here? What are the environmental factors that might explain this behavior? What's normal for this culture or this social situation? What just happened in the conversation that might have triggered this change? Without context, you're just seeing behaviors. With context, you're reading meaning. The third advanced principle is temporal pattern recognition. Single interactions tell you much less than patterns over time. How someone's behavior toward you changes across weeks and months reveals their true feelings more accurately than any single conversation ever could. Track trends rather than isolated incidents. Your colleague was collaborative and warm for the first 3 months you worked together. Over the past 6 weeks, they've become progressively more distant, less responsive to your messages, less engaged in meetings where you're presenting. This temporal pattern tells you the relationship is deteriorating, regardless of what they say when you ask if everything is okay. Your romantic partner used to initiate contact multiple times per day. Over the past 2 months, the frequency has dropped to once per day, then every other day, then only when you initiate first. This temporal pattern reveals withdrawal, regardless of their words about still caring about the relationship. Look for acceleration or deceleration of behaviors. Are they becoming more engaged or less engaged over time? More reliable or less reliable? More open or more guarded? More physically affectionate or more distant? The direction of change over time is often more significant than the absolute level of any single behavior. The fourth advanced principle is strategic questioning. The questions you ask and how you ask them can dramatically increase the information you gain from interactions. Some questions create cognitive load for liars while being easy for truth-tellers. Others reveal information through what people don't correct rather than what they say directly. Cognitive load. Questions require someone to access actual memories rather than construct false narratives. Tell me about that day, from the moment you woke up until you went to bed, in chronological order, with as much detail as possible. For someone telling the truth, this is easy. They're just recalling what happened. For someone lying, this is difficult. They have to construct a coherent false narrative with plausible details while suppressing the true narrative. Watch for increased deviations from baseline when they're answering these questions. Assumption questions state something as if it's already established fact, and watch whether they correct you. So when you decided to take that money, what were you thinking? If they're innocent, they'll immediately and forcefully correct your assumption. I never took any money. I don't know what you're talking about. If they're guilty, they often fail to correct the assumption and instead focus on justifying their reasoning. I was in a desperate situation and I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. Commitment questions establish their version of events before you ask pointed questions. Just to be clear, you were alone all evening. Is that right? Yes, completely alone. Now, when you reveal evidence that they weren't alone, their credibility is destroyed because they've already committed to a false statement. The fifth advanced principle is micro-expression recognition. Emotions flash across people's faces before conscious control suppresses them. These micro-expressions last between 1/15th and 1/5 of a second. Most people never see them because they're not looking and don't know what to look for. But once you train yourself to catch them, they reveal genuine emotions that contradict performed expressions. The 7 universal emotions that appear in micro-expressions are happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, contempt, and surprise. Someone might tell you they're happy about your promotion, while a flash of contempt crosses their face before they consciously suppress it and create a smile. That micro-expression told you the truth. They feel contempt, not happiness. But it appeared and disappeared so quickly that without training, you'd miss it entirely. Practice by watching people's faces during emotional moments in videos. Play them in slow motion initially so you can see the micro-expressions clearly. Then gradually increase speed until you're catching them in real time. Your brain can learn to perceive these fleeting expressions with practice, and once it does, you'll see emotions people are hiding constantly. The sixth advanced principle is voice stress analysis. The human voice carries enormous amounts of emotional information that most people process unconsciously but never analyze consciously. When someone experiences stress, fear, deception, or intense emotion, Their voice changes in predictable ways. Pitch rises under stress. The vocal cords tighten and the fundamental frequency increases. Someone's voice might rise a full note or more when they're lying compared to their baseline pitch when telling the truth. Pace changes under cognitive load. Liars often speak more slowly than their baseline because constructing false narratives requires more mental processing time. Or they might speak much faster, rushing through the deceptive parts to get past them quickly. Volume can decrease when someone is ashamed or uncertain about what they're saying, or increase when they're trying to convince you through force rather than facts. Fluency breaks down under deception. Someone who normally speaks in smooth, flowing sentences starts having more pauses, more ums and ahs, more false starts and self-corrections. Listen for these patterns while someone is answering different questions. Their voice is smooth and steady when answering neutral questions. But when you ask about a specific topic, suddenly their pitch rises, their pace changes, their fluency breaks down. That's a vocal cluster indicating stress around that topic. The seventh advanced principle is behavioral prediction. Once you understand someone's core values, deep fears, and primary motivations, you can predict their future behavior in various scenarios with remarkable accuracy. Because people are consistent with their psychology, even when they think they're being unpredictable. Someone whose core value is status and social standing will sacrifice almost anything to maintain or increase their status. You can predict they'll take credit for others' work, abandon relationships that don't serve their image, and make decisions based on how they'll look rather than what's right. Someone whose deep fear is abandonment will tolerate mistreatment rather than risk being alone. You can predict they'll stay in unhealthy relationships, accept disrespect, and compromise their boundaries to keep people close. Someone whose primary motivation is security will choose safe options over potentially better risky options almost every time. You can predict they'll stay in jobs they hate rather than pursue opportunities with uncertainty, hold on to relationships that aren't fulfilling because they're familiar, and resist change even when change would benefit them. Understanding these deep patterns allows you to predict behavior before it happens and position yourself accordingly. You know who will support you under pressure and who will abandon you. You know who will keep their word and who will break promises when circumstances change. You know who to invest in deeply and who to keep at arm's length. These advanced tools work together as an integrated system. You're establishing baseline and watching for deviations. You're reading clusters across multiple channels. You're factoring in context. You're tracking temporal patterns. You're asking strategic questions. You're catching micro-expressions. You're analyzing vocal stress. And you're predicting future behavior based on deep psychological patterns, all simultaneously, all unconsciously, all automatically, once you've practiced enough that it becomes integrated into how you naturally perceive people. But mastering these techniques is only half of the equation. The other half is building the internal and external conditions that allow these skills to function at their highest level consistently over time. You can know every principle and technique perfectly, but still fail at reading people accurately if you don't establish the right foundations. The first and most critical foundation is managing your own emotional reactivity. You cannot read others clearly when your own emotions are distorting your perception like a filter over a camera lens. When you desperately want someone to be trustworthy, you'll miss the signs that they're not. When you're afraid of being alone, you'll ignore red flags in relationships. When you're angry at someone, you'll interpret neutral behaviors as hostile. When you're anxious about an outcome, you'll see threats that don't exist. Your emotional state directly impacts what you perceive and how you interpret what you're perceiving. This isn't optional psychology. It's neurological reality. When you're emotionally activated, your amygdala takes over and your prefrontal cortex goes offline. The part of your brain responsible for nuanced analysis and accurate perception gets suppressed in favor of the part designed for immediate survival responses. You literally cannot think clearly or perceive accurately when you're in an emotionally reactive state. So developing emotional regulation becomes foundational to perceptual accuracy. This means practices that help you maintain a calm, centered internal state regardless of external circumstances. Meditation trains your ability to observe thoughts and feelings without being controlled by them. Breathing techniques activate your parasympathetic nervous system and restore rational thinking. When you notice yourself becoming reactive, physical exercise processes stress hormones and reduces baseline anxiety that clouds perception. But emotional regulation isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending you don't feel things. It's about creating enough space between the feeling and your response that you can choose how to proceed. You feel anger, but you don't act from anger. You feel fear, but you don't let fear dictate your perceptions. You feel desire, but you don't allow desire to blind you to contradictory information. Practice observing your own emotional state before trying to read others. Notice when you're activated. Recognize what triggers your reactivity. Understand your patterns, because you cannot read anyone else accurately when you're not reading yourself accurately first. The second foundation is cultivating genuine curiosity about people, not judgment, not evaluation, not trying to use them or defend against them. Pure curiosity about how they think, what they feel, what motivates them, what frightens them, how they see the world. When you approach people as puzzles to understand, rather than threats to defend against or resources to exploit, your perception becomes dramatically more accurate. Judgment closes perception. When you've already decided someone is bad or good, trustworthy or deceptive, valuable or worthless, you stop gathering new information. You've reached a conclusion, and now you're just confirming it. Curiosity keeps perception open. You're genuinely interested in understanding this person more deeply, which means you remain receptive to information that contradicts your initial impressions. This curiosity needs to be authentic, not strategic. People can sense when your interest in them is genuine versus when you're gathering information to manipulate or use them. Genuine curiosity creates safety that allows people to be more authentic, which gives you more accurate information to read. Strategic curiosity creates wariness that causes people to be more guarded and performative, which makes accurate reading more difficult. Ask yourself before interactions, am I approaching this person with genuine curiosity about who they are? Or am I approaching them with an agenda that's distorting how I perceive them? The quality of your perception depends on the answer. The third foundation is developing your own emotional intelligence. You can only perceive in others what you've learned to recognize in yourself. If you've never acknowledged your own envy, you won't recognize it in others. If you've never examined your own fear patterns, you'll miss them in others. If you don't understand your own mechanisms of self-deception, you won't catch others deceiving themselves. This means doing deep internal work, understanding your own emotions with precision, recognizing your defense mechanisms, acknowledging your shadow aspects, the parts of yourself you'd rather not look at, examining your motivations honestly. understanding what triggers you and why. The more thoroughly you understand your own psychology, the more accurately you can read psychology in others. Someone who has never dealt with their own anger will misinterpret anger in others. Someone who hasn't processed their own shame will miss shame signals. Someone who hasn't examined their own manipulative tendencies won't recognize manipulation when it's directed at them. Your blind spots about yourself become blind spots about others. Invest in understanding yourself with the same intensity you invest in understanding others. Therapy, journaling, honest self-reflection. Feedback from people who will tell you the truth about yourself. The internal work makes the external perception possible. The fourth foundation is systematic observation practice in daily life. Your pattern recognition database needs to be vast and varied. You build this database by deliberately watching people in public spaces, noticing patterns, making predictions, testing those predictions, and learning from the feedback. Sit in a coffee shop and watch interactions. Notice how different people express the same emotions differently. Watch couples and try to assess the health of their relationships based on body language, proxemics, and interaction patterns. Watch business meetings through windows and try to identify who has status, who's anxious, who's confident, who's lying. Make predictions about what will happen next in interactions and see if you're right. This isn't creepy observation. This is training. Athletes watch film. Musicians listen to performances. You're watching human behavior to build the internal database that allows your unconscious mind to recognize patterns instantly. The more examples you observe, the more sophisticated your pattern recognition becomes. Watch people from different cultures, different age groups, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different personality types. Notice how the same emotion appears differently across these variables. Notice what's universal and what's cultural. Build a database that's diverse enough to handle the full range of human variation you'll encounter. The fifth foundation is diverse social exposure. The more different types of people you interact with directly, the better you become at reading people generally. If you only interact with people similar to yourself, your baseline expectations become narrow, and you'll misread anyone who doesn't fit those patterns. Deliberately seek out people who are different from you. Different cultures, different communication styles, different values, different ways of seeing the world. This isn't about forced diversity for its own sake. This is about expanding your perceptual range so you can accurately read people across the full spectrum of human variation. Introverts and extroverts have completely different baseline behaviors. What looks like deception in an introvert might just be their normal level of reserve. What looks like genuine enthusiasm in an extrovert might be their baseline friendliness that they show everyone. You need exposure to both to calibrate your readings accurately. People from high-context cultures communicate very differently than people from low-context cultures. Direct eye contact means different things. Personal space norms are different. Emotional expression is different. You need exposure to these differences, or you'll misread entire categories of people. The sixth foundation is creating feedback loops that calibrate your accuracy. You make an assessment about someone. Then you test that assessment by asking questions or waiting to see if events confirm your reading. Then you calibrate based on whether you were right or wrong. This active testing and calibration is what transforms theoretical knowledge into practical skill. When you get a sense that someone is being deceptive, test it. Ask follow-up questions that would create cognitive load if they're lying, but be easy if they're telling the truth. Watch how they respond. Were you right about the deception? If yes, Note what signals led you to that conclusion. If no, examine what you misread and why. When you predict someone will behave a certain way based on their values and motivations, wait and see if they actually behave that way. When your prediction is accurate, it confirms your reading was correct. When your prediction is wrong, it tells you that you misunderstood something fundamental about them and you need to recalibrate. This feedback loop process is uncomfortable because it forces you to confront when you're wrong. But it's essential for developing real accuracy rather than false confidence. The seventh foundation is sleep, stress management, and mental clarity. Your ability to pick up subtle signals deteriorates dramatically when you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or cognitively depleted. Reading people requires attentional resources, working memory, and processing capacity. When those resources are depleted, your accuracy plummets. Sleep deprivation reduces your ability to recognize emotions in facial expressions by 40%. It impairs your ability to notice behavioral changes. It makes you more reactive and less able to maintain the emotional regulation necessary for clear perception. If you're not sleeping 7 to 8 hours per night consistently, your people reading abilities are severely compromised regardless of your skill level. Chronic stress keeps you in a state of threat detection that biases your perception toward seeing danger everywhere. You become hypervigilant but less accurate, seeing threats that don't exist while missing actual warning signs because your nervous system is overwhelmed. Stress management through exercise, meditation, time in nature, and genuine rest becomes essential for maintaining perceptual accuracy. Mental clarity requires managing your cognitive load. When your mind is scattered across dozens of concerns, problems, and distractions, you don't have the attentional resources to notice subtle behavioral signals. Creating space for focused attention, whether through better time management, reducing commitments, or simply choosing to be fully present during important interactions, dramatically improves what you're able to perceive. The eighth foundation is environmental design that supports focused attention. You cannot read people accurately while checking your phone, thinking about other things, or operating in distracting environments. Creating conditions that allow for focused observation makes accurate perception possible. Choose in-person communication over digital whenever possible. You get access to all 7 channels of communication in person. You only get 1 or 2 channels through text or email. The information density is exponentially higher face-to-face, which means your readings become exponentially more accurate. Minimize environmental distractions during important interactions. Turn off notifications. Close the laptop. Put the phone away. Give your full attention to observing the person in front of you. This focused attention is what allows you to notice micro-expressions, vocal changes, and subtle behavioral shifts that you'd miss if your attention was divided. These foundations work together to create the conditions where technical skills can operate at their highest level. All the techniques in the world don't matter if you are too emotionally reactive to perceive clearly, too narrow in your exposure to recognize diverse patterns, too exhausted to notice subtle signals, or too distracted to give focused attention. Build these foundations first. Maintain them consistently, and your perceptual skills will have the infrastructure they need to develop into true mastery. Everything you've learned so far isn't just practical technique. It's grounded in decades of neuroscience research, psychological studies, and empirical evidence about how human communication actually works at the biological and cognitive level. Understanding the science behind these principles strengthens your confidence in applying them, and helps you distinguish between what's real and what's popular. Mythology about reading people. Let's start with the most fundamental fact. Non-verbal communication evolved millions of years before language. Our primate ancestors were reading facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones long before humans developed the capacity for complex verbal communication. This evolutionary history means that non-verbal channels are deeply embedded in brain structures that operate largely outside conscious control, making them significantly more honest than verbal communication. When you speak, you're using relatively recent brain structures in your prefrontal cortex that allow for conscious deliberation and strategic communication. You can carefully choose your words. You can craft narratives. You can say things that aren't true. But your non-verbal communication is controlled by much older brain systems, the limbic system and brainstem structures that evolved for immediate emotional expression and social signaling. These systems are much harder to consciously override, which is why your body often tells the truth even when your words are lying. This is why baseline and deviation works. You can consciously control what you say, but you cannot perfectly control your micro-expressions, your autonomic nervous system responses, your baseline deviations across all channels simultaneously. Something always leaks through because the brain systems controlling non-verbal communication are partially outside conscious control. Mirror neurons provide another crucial piece of the neuroscience puzzle. These are brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that action. When you watch someone smile, mirror neurons in your brain activate the same neural patterns as if you were smiling. When you observe someone in distress, your brain simulates that distress internally. This is the neurological basis of empathy and emotional resonance. This mirroring happens automatically and unconsciously. Your brain is constantly simulating the emotional states of people you're observing, which creates gut feelings about what they're experiencing. When you say someone feels off, even though you can't articulate why, it's often because your mirror neuron system is detecting incongruence between their verbal content and their non-verbal signals. Your brain is simulating their state and recognizing that something doesn't match. The neuroscience of deception reveals why lies are detectable even from skilled liars. Lying creates significant cognitive load. To lie effectively, your brain must simultaneously construct a false narrative that sounds plausible, suppress the true narrative to prevent it from leaking out. Monitor the other person's reactions to see if they're believing you. Remember what you've already said to maintain consistency and manage your own anxiety about being caught. This is enormously demanding cognitively. This cognitive load manifests in detectable behavioral changes. Liars often show increased response latency because constructing false narratives takes more processing time than recalling true memories. They show decreased detail in their narratives because adding plausible false details increases cognitive load beyond what most people can handle smoothly. They show increased self-monitoring behaviors like touching their face, adjusting their clothing, or checking their appearance because they're hyper-aware of how they're coming across. They show increased baseline deviations across multiple channels because the cognitive load makes it harder to maintain perfect control over all aspects of behavior. This doesn't mean every liar shows the same tells. Individual variation is enormous. But the underlying principle is consistent. Deception creates cognitive load, and cognitive load creates observable behavioral changes from baseline. The specific changes vary by individual, which is why establishing personal baseline is so critical. Paul Ekman's research on facial expressions revolutionized our understanding of emotional communication. Through decades of cross-cultural research, Ekman identified 7 universal emotions that appear in facial expressions across all human cultures: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, contempt, and surprise. The facial muscle patterns for these emotions are identical, whether you're studying people in New York, rural Japan, isolated tribes in Papua New Guinea, or anywhere else on Earth. This universality exists because these expressions evolved before human cultures diverged. They're hardwired into our biology, controlled by brain structures that are consistent across all humans. Ekman also discovered that these genuine expressions involve specific muscle combinations that are extremely difficult to fake convincingly. A genuine smile, called a Duchenne smile, involves both the zygomatic major muscle that pulls the mouth corners up and the orbicularis oculi muscle that creates crow's feet around the eyes. Most people can consciously activate the mouth muscle, but cannot voluntarily activate the eye muscle. This is why fake smiles don't reach the eyes. Ekman's research on micro-expressions revealed that genuine emotions flash across the face in as little as 1/15 of a second before conscious suppression kicks in. These micro-expressions reveal true emotional states, even when someone is trying to hide them. Training yourself to catch micro-expressions gives you access to information that the person is actively trying to conceal from you. The psychology of why baseline deviations are more significant than static behaviors relates to signal detection theory. In any environment with lots of noise, what stands out is change, not steady states. Your brain is designed to notice novelty and deviation because those are what indicate significant events. A person sitting with crossed arms tells you nothing unless you know whether crossed arms is their baseline or a deviation from their baseline. The deviation carries the signal. The static behavior is just noise. This is why cataloging individual baselines is so crucial and why universal body language dictionaries are so unreliable. The meaning isn't in the behavior itself. The meaning is in the change from what's normal for this specific person. The Dunning-Kruger effect appears strongly in people-reading abilities. Most people are dramatically overconfident in their ability to detect deception. Research shows that untrained observers detect lies at barely above chance levels, around 54% accuracy, when chance alone would be 50%. But when you ask people how good they think they are at detecting deception, the average person rates themselves at 70 to 80% accuracy. This massive gap between perceived and actual ability exists because people don't get reliable feedback on their assessments. When someone fools you, you often never find out, so you continue believing you read them accurately. This overconfidence is dangerous because it makes people vulnerable to skilled deceivers while simultaneously making them resistant to training. They don't think they need to improve a skill they falsely believe they've already mastered. Recognizing that you're probably much worse at reading people than you think you are is the first step toward actually becoming good at it. Research on body language clusters confirms what we've discussed about never interpreting single signals in isolation. Individual gestures are notoriously unreliable as indicators of internal states because they're heavily influenced by context, culture, individual habit, and random variation. But clusters of signals across multiple channels show much higher reliability. When 3 or more channels all deviate from baseline in ways that suggest the same underlying state, accuracy increases dramatically. Context dependency is another crucial finding. The same behavior means completely different things in different situations. Arms crossed while standing outside in cold weather means nothing. arms suddenly crossed during a specific topic in an otherwise warm room, means everything. Without factoring context into interpretation, even accurate observation leads to inaccurate conclusions. The neuroscience of intuition reveals why gut feelings are often more accurate than deliberate, conscious analysis. Your unconscious mind processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind processes approximately 40 bits per second. This means your unconscious is processing vast amounts of social and behavioral information that never reaches conscious awareness, but still influences your perceptions and decisions. When you get a gut feeling that something is off about someone, that feeling is often your unconscious mind detecting patterns and incongruences faster than your conscious mind can articulate. The feeling precedes the conscious analysis because the unconscious processing happens first and faster. Learning to trust these gut feelings while also verifying them consciously creates a powerful combination of intuitive and analytical people reading. However, intuition can also be wrong when it's based on biases and stereotypes rather than actual pattern recognition. The key is calibrating your intuition through feedback loops. When your gut feeling proves accurate, trust increases. When it proves inaccurate, you investigate what led you astray and adjust. Over time, well-calibrated intuition becomes remarkably reliable. Research on vocal analysis shows that voice carries more emotional information than verbal content. Studies where people listen to speech in foreign languages they don't understand show that listeners can still identify emotions with 70 to 80% accuracy based purely on vocal qualities. Pitch, rhythm, volume, pace, and tonal variation communicate emotional state independently of what's being said. The voice is also highly sensitive to stress and deception. Vocal pitch increases under stress due to tension in the vocal cords. Pace changes under cognitive load. Fluency breaks down when someone is constructing false narratives rather than recalling true memories. These vocal changes happen partially outside conscious control, making voice analysis a reliable channel for detecting emotional states and deception. The psychology of projection explains why self-awareness is foundational to reading others accurately. You unconsciously assume others think and feel like you do. This projection is automatic and largely unconscious. If you're an honest person, you project honesty onto others and miss deception. If you're anxious, you project anxiety onto others and misinterpret neutral behaviors as indicating distress. If you're manipulative, you project manipulation and see ulterior motives where none exist. Understanding your own psychology, your own biases, your own emotional patterns is what allows you to factor out projection and see people as they actually are, rather than as reflections of yourself. This is why therapy, self-reflection, and honest feedback about your own psychological makeup make you better at reading others. You're learning to distinguish between what's actually there in the other person and what you are unconsciously projecting onto them. All of this science converges on a single conclusion. Reading people accurately is possible. It's not magic or mystical intuition. It's applied neuroscience and psychology, understanding how brains work, how emotions manifest in behavior, how deception creates detectable cognitive load, how culture influences expression while leaving core patterns universal, and how your own psychology influences your perception. When you apply these scientific principles systematically, your accuracy improves dramatically above the baseline chance levels that characterize untrained observation. The science validates everything you've learned and provides the foundation for continued development of these crucial skills. The true test of these skills comes when the stakes are highest and accuracy matters most. When you're in situations where reading people incorrectly could cost you opportunities, relationships, money, or safety. When deception is most likely because the other person has strong incentives to hide their true thoughts and intentions. These are the moments that separate theoretical knowledge from practical mastery. Let's start with job interviews, where both parties are performing and authentic signals are buried beneath professional personas. You're sitting across from an interviewer, and you need to know whether they're genuinely interested in you or just going through the motions of completing their interview quota. Watch their baseline first during initial small talk. Notice their energy level, eye contact patterns, body positioning, and engagement level when discussing neutral topics. Then watch for changes when the conversation shifts to your qualifications and experience. If genuine interest exists, you'll see increased forward lean, more direct eye contact, more note-taking or active listening behaviors, questions that go deeper rather than staying surface level, and vocal tone that becomes more engaged and energized. If they're going through motions, you'll see maintained distance, eye contact that's polite but not engaged, perfunctory note-taking, questions that feel scripted rather than responsive to what you're saying, and vocal tone that remains flat regardless of your answers. Pay attention to concerns they're not voicing directly. When you mention specific aspects of your background, watch for micro-expressions of doubt or concern, a brief flash of uncertainty, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a momentary pause before they respond. These signals tell you they have reservations about what you just said, even if they don't articulate those reservations verbally. This gives you the opportunity to address their concerns proactively before they become reasons not to hire you. Read the power dynamics in the room. Who defers to whom? Whose opinion seems to carry more weight? Who asks the substantive questions versus who asks the procedural ones? Understanding the real hierarchy allows you to direct your energy toward the actual decision-makers rather than treating everyone equally when they're not equal in influence. In negotiations, reading people accurately can mean the difference between excellent deals and terrible ones. The other party has every incentive to hide their true priorities, their real limitations, and their actual walk-away point. Your job is to read through the performance to the reality underneath. Establish their baseline during preliminary discussion about neutral topics. Then watch what changes when money, terms, or commitments are discussed. Their stated position might be that they absolutely cannot go below a certain price. But watch their non-verbal communication when you push back on that position. Do they show genuine stress and firmness? Or do they show the cognitive load of maintaining a bluff? Genuine limits produce different signals than strategic positions. When someone has truly hit their limit, you'll see congruent stress across all channels. Their voice becomes more firm and certain, not less. Their body language becomes more still and grounded, not more agitated. Their facial expression shows genuine resolve. When someone is bluffing about their limit, you'll see incongruence. Their words say this is their final position, but their voice wavers. Their body language shows uncertainty. They provide elaborate justifications when simple statements would suffice if they were telling the truth. Watch what topics create the most baseline deviation. When you mention specific terms or conditions, do they tense up? Do they rush to change the subject? Do they become more defensive? These deviations tell you where their real priorities and real concerns lie, which might be completely different from what they're stating explicitly. In romantic relationships, the stakes are deeply personal, and the potential for self-deception is enormous. You want someone to be genuinely interested, so you're motivated to miss signals that they're not. This is where rigorous adherence to baseline and deviation becomes your protection against your own wishful thinking. Genuine attraction produces consistent signals across time and across contexts. They initiate contact regularly. They make time for you even when it's inconvenient. Their body language is consistently open and oriented toward you. They maintain eye contact that's warm rather than polite. They remember details you've shared and reference them in later conversations. They introduce you to important people in their life. They make plans that extend into the future. And all of these behaviors remain consistent, whether you're alone together or in public, whether things are going well or you've had a disagreement, whether they're in a good mood or stressed. Performative attraction shows different patterns. High intensity early that doesn't match the actual depth of connection you've built. Inconsistency across contexts. They're affectionate in private but distant in public, or vice versa. Resistance to integration into their broader life. Vagueness about future plans beyond the immediate term. And most tellingly, incongruence between their words about commitment and their behaviors around availability, transparency, and investment. Infidelity creates detectable behavioral changes long before you have proof. Not because cheaters are bad at hiding affairs, but because maintaining a double life creates cognitive load and emotional distance that manifests in baseline deviations. Decreased physical affection, increased phone guarding. More time unaccounted for with explanations that are either too detailed or too vague. Decreased interest in your life and reduced emotional intimacy. Increased defensiveness when asked routine questions. Changes in intimacy patterns. And perhaps most significantly, projection where they suddenly become suspicious of you or accusatory about your faithfulness when they're the one being unfaithful. In conflict situations, reading aggression levels accurately determines whether you engage or disengage for safety. Genuine aggression that's likely to escalate shows specific physiological markers. Breathing becomes faster and shallower. Nostrils may flare. Facial blood flow increases, creating flushing. Pupils dilate. Body becomes more rigid, and tension increases in jaw and shoulders. Hands may clench into fists. Personal space violations become more pronounced. Voice volume increases and pitch rises. Performative aggression designed to intimidate rather than actually escalate shows different patterns. Louder volume, but less actual physiological arousal. More words and threats, but less physical preparation for violence. Behavior that's designed to be seen and noticed rather than efficient movement. Continued engagement in conversation rather than the tunnel vision that accompanies genuine readiness for physical confrontation. Reading whether someone is genuinely remorseful versus performing apology determines whether reconciliation is possible or whether you're being manipulated into accepting unacceptable behavior again. Genuine remorse shows specific patterns. Unprompted acknowledgement of harm caused, not just regret at being caught. Specific understanding of what they did wrong without justifications or deflections. Clear statements of what they'll do differently going forward. Patience with your processing and healing rather than rushing you to forgive. Behavioral changes that start immediately rather than promises about future changes. And willingness to accept consequences without demanding immediate restoration of trust. Manipulative apology shows different patterns. Focus on their suffering rather than yours. Elaborate justifications for why they behaved badly. Attempts to shift blame partially onto you or circumstances, impatience with your continued hurt or anger, demands for immediate forgiveness and return to normal, promises about change without specific plans or immediate behavioral shifts, and most tellingly, incongruence between their words of remorse and their body language that shows resentment at having to apologize at all. In sales and influence contexts, identifying the real decision-maker versus the apparent decision-maker is crucial. Watch who others look at before speaking. Who has the final word when opinions differ? Whose concerns get addressed first and most thoroughly? Who asks the substantive questions about impact and implementation rather than procedural questions about process? The real decision-maker often speaks less than you'd expect, but carries disproportionate weight when they do speak. Buying signals versus polite interest appear in distinct patterns. Genuine buying interest shows increased forward lean, more detailed questions about implementation and specifics, discussion about how this would work in their specific situation, questions about next steps and timeline, and a shift from evaluating whether they want this to evaluating how they'll make it work. Polite interest maintains distance, asks only general questions, keeps discussion theoretical rather than specific to their situation, and shows more concern with objections than with implementation. Protecting against manipulation requires recognizing specific tactics by their behavioral signatures. Love bombing shows excessive intensity too early, overwhelming attention and affection that doesn't match the actual relationship foundation you've built. Grand gestures that feel performative, and most tellingly, rapid escalation of commitment language before you've had time to truly know each other. The incongruence is between the intensity of their expression and the shallowness of actual understanding about who you are. Gaslighting attempts show up as persistent denial of events you clearly remember, claiming you said or did things you didn't, reframing your emotional reactions as unreasonable or crazy, and progressively making you doubt your own perception and memory. The behavioral signature is their absolute certainty about their version of events combined with dismissiveness of your experience. Guilt-tripping shows as bringing up past favors or sacrifices whenever you set boundaries, framing your reasonable needs as you being selfish or uncaring, making their emotional state your responsibility, and creating obligation where none should exist. Watch for incongruence between their claimed generosity and their constant reminders of that generosity. Genuine giving doesn't require constant acknowledgement, but perhaps the most important skill is maintaining your own perceptual accuracy when you're under stress, pressure, or emotional activation. When you're anxious about the outcome of an interview, when you're angry during a conflict, when you're emotionally invested in someone being trustworthy, your own state threatens to distort your perception. This requires real-time emotional regulation during high-stakes interactions. Notice when you're becoming activated. Feel your heart rate increasing, or your breathing becoming shallow, or your thoughts racing. This is your signal to pause, take a breath, and restore your centered state before continuing. You cannot read others clearly from an activated state. Create deliberate separation between observation and interpretation. Notice what you're seeing without immediately jumping to conclusions about what it means. Just catalog the data. They crossed their arms. Their voice pitch rose. They broke eye contact. You'll interpret later. Right now, you're just observing and storing information. Check your own wishful thinking. Am I seeing what's actually there or what I want to be there? Am I dismissing contradictory signals because they're inconvenient? Am I creating elaborate explanations for behavior that has a much simpler and less favorable explanation. These questions keep you honest with yourself. The pressure situations are where your skills either prove real or reveal themselves as theoretical knowledge that collapses under stress. Practice in low-stakes situations until reading people becomes automatic. Then when stakes rise, your skills remain functional because they're integrated into how you naturally perceive rather than something you have to consciously remember to do. You are no longer the person who started this journey. That version of you, the one who walked through life half blind, making decisions based on what people said while missing what they actually meant, no longer exists. You've undergone a fundamental transformation in how you perceive and understand human behavior. This isn't something you're trying to learn anymore. This is who you've become. You now possess a form of vision that most people will never develop. When you walk into a room, you're processing information across 7 channels of communication simultaneously. You're establishing baselines automatically. You're noticing deviations without conscious effort. You're reading clusters of signals that reveal authentic emotional states beneath performed social masks. You're seeing the hidden dynamics, the unspoken tensions, the genuine connections, and the strategic performances that shape every interaction. This isn't a skill you consciously apply. It's integrated into how you naturally perceive the world. The way you currently see colors or hear sounds without thinking about the neurological processes involved. Your brain has automated the pattern recognition. Your unconscious mind processes the subtle signals faster than conscious analysis ever could. You simply know things about people that others miss entirely, and you know them with a level of confidence that comes from systematic calibration and repeated accuracy. You trust your perceptions now in ways you couldn't before. When you sense that something is off about someone, you don't dismiss that feeling as paranoia or projection. You recognize it as your unconscious pattern recognition detecting incongruence across multiple channels. When you read someone as trustworthy, you have confidence in that assessment because it's based on congruence across all their communication channels over time. When you spot manipulation attempts, you see them clearly for what they are before they can take hold. You no longer enter relationships blind. Every new person you meet reveals themselves to you within the first few conversations. Not completely, not in every detail, but in the fundamentals that matter. You can see whether they're authentic or performative, whether their interest in you is genuine or strategic, whether they possess the character traits they claim to possess, whether their stated values align with their actual priorities as revealed through their behavior. You no longer ignore red flags, those warning signs that used to make you vaguely uncomfortable, but that you dismissed because you couldn't articulate what was wrong. You now recognize them instantly and clearly. The incongruence between words and actions, the baseline deviations that suggest deception or hidden agendas, the clusters of signals indicating that someone is not who they're presenting themselves to be. You see these patterns forming, and you respond to them appropriately, rather than discovering the truth too late. You no longer give trust indiscriminately. You've developed the ability to calibrate trust to what's actually deserved based on evidence rather than hope. You can identify the people who warrant deep investment, and you can build profound connections with them without reservation. You can recognize the people who don't deserve your trust, and you can protect yourself from them without becoming bitter or closed off. And you can navigate the vast middle ground of normal human interaction with appropriate engagement, giving what's warranted to each relationship based on what's actually there. You can now distinguish between genuine connection and skilled performance. When someone is truly interested in you, engaged with you, aligned with you. You recognize it through the congruence of their communication across all channels over time. When someone is performing interest while actually pursuing their own agenda, you see through it immediately. The micro-expressions don't match the performed expressions. The baseline deviations reveal discomfort or deception. The temporal patterns show inconsistency between different contexts. The performance is visible to you, even when it fools everyone else in the room. You can distinguish between authentic emotion and strategic display. Real emotions create specific physiological responses, specific facial muscle movements, specific vocal changes that are extremely difficult to fake convincingly. Performed emotions show the cognitive load of maintaining the performance, the slight delays in response, the lack of autonomic responses, the incongruence between different channels. You read the difference automatically now, which means you know when someone's anger is genuine versus performative, when their enthusiasm is real versus strategic, when their remorse is authentic versus manipulative. You can distinguish between people who mean what they say and people who say what's convenient. Because meaning what you say creates congruence between verbal content and all other channels of communication. Saying what's convenient while meaning something else creates detectable incongruence. You see that incongruence now. You hear it in vocal stress. You catch it in micro-expressions. You notice it in baseline deviations. You track it in temporal inconsistencies between what someone says and what they do over time. This mastery creates compounding advantages that accumulate throughout your life. You make better relationship choices because you can assess character accurately before investing deeply. You avoid the relationships that would have wasted years of your life and caused profound pain. You invest in the relationships that are genuinely aligned with who you are and what you value. Over decades, this difference in relationship selection creates a completely different quality of life. You recognize opportunities and threats faster than others. You can assess whether a business opportunity is legitimate or deceptive before you've invested significant resources. You can identify people who will support your growth versus people who will undermine it. You can spot emerging problems in relationships or organizations early enough to address them before they become crises. This early recognition allows you to position yourself advantageously rather than constantly reacting to situations after they've already developed. You have genuine protection against manipulation. The tactics that work on most people don't work on you because you can see them forming. Love bombing is obvious because the intensity doesn't match the foundation. Gaslighting fails because you trust your own perceptions and you can see the incongruence in their denial. Guilt-tripping doesn't land because you recognize the manipulation pattern beneath the emotional appeal. You're not immune to all social influence, but you're immune to the deceptive varieties that prey on people's inability to read beneath the surface. You build deeper connections with trustworthy people. Because you can recognize authenticity when you encounter it, you can be fully present and open with people who deserve that openness. You don't have to guard yourself against everyone because you can distinguish between the people who are safe and the people who aren't. This allows for profound intimacy and genuine vulnerability with those who've earned it, creating relationships of depth and meaning that aren't available to people who either trust everyone or trust no one. You possess quiet confidence that comes from truly understanding human nature. You're not arrogant about your perceptual abilities. You know that you can still be wrong and that perfect accuracy is impossible. but you have justified confidence based on repeated calibration that your readings are significantly more accurate than chance, more accurate than most people's assessments, accurate enough to make better decisions and navigate social dynamics more effectively. This confidence manifests not as loudness or assertion, but as calm certainty. You know what you know. But with this power comes responsibility. Understanding people at this level means using that understanding ethically. Not manipulating others just because you can read their vulnerabilities and pressure points. Not exploiting people's weaknesses for your own advantage. Not using your perceptual accuracy to harm people who've done nothing to deserve that harm. The ability to see beneath the surface carries the obligation to use that vision wisely. It also means not becoming cynical or paranoid. Yes, you can now see that many people are performing rather than being authentic. Yes, you can spot deception and manipulation more readily. Yes, you understand that self-interest drives much of human behavior. But this understanding doesn't require you to lose compassion or assume the worst about everyone. Most people are doing the best they can with the awareness and skills they possess. Most deception isn't malicious, it's protective. Most performance isn't manipulative, it's self-preservation in a world that punishes vulnerability. Understanding people doesn't mean losing compassion for them. If anything, it should deepen compassion because you can see the fear, the pain, the wounds that drive behavior others might judge as simply bad. You can see when someone is aggressive because they're terrified, when someone is deceptive because they're ashamed, when someone is withdrawn because they're hurting. This deeper understanding allows for compassion even when you're protecting yourself from their behavior. Your future now looks fundamentally different than it would have without these skills. You navigate relationships with wisdom and ease rather than confusion and anxiety. You make decisions about people with confidence rather than constant second-guessing. You build a life surrounded by people who are genuinely aligned with your values rather than people who performed alignment until it became inconvenient. You become a source of insight and protection for the people you care about, helping them see what they're missing, warning them about threats they haven't recognized, guiding them toward people and opportunities that are genuine. You're no longer one step behind the social dynamics happening around you. You're seeing them as they form and positioning yourself effectively. You're no longer constantly discovering important truths too late for them to matter. You're recognizing those truths early and acting on them while action is still possible. You're no longer vulnerable to anyone skilled enough to tell you what you want to hear. You're seeing through the performance to the reality underneath. This is the transformation, from someone who took people at face value to someone who reads the complete message, from someone who was constantly blindsided to someone who sees what's coming, from someone who misplaced trust to someone who calibrates trust accurately, from someone who felt socially incompetent to someone who understands human nature at levels most never reach. You now possess one of the most valuable skills in human existence: the ability to see beneath the surface, the ability to understand what's really happening in any interaction, the ability to distinguish truth from performance, authenticity from deception, genuine connection from strategic relationship. This skill will serve you for the rest of your life. It will protect you from threats. It will guide you toward opportunities. It will help you build relationships of genuine depth and meaning. It will allow you to navigate the social world with wisdom, confidence, and clarity. The invisible language you've been missing your entire life is now visible to you, and you can never unsee it. every interaction from this moment forward contains information that was always there, but that you can now perceive and interpret. You've developed new eyes for seeing the world, and what you see now is the truth that lives beneath the words, the truth that most people speak constantly through their bodies, their faces, their voices, their patterns, the truth they're broadcasting to anyone who knows how to read it.